What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review the new film BlackBerry, which came out today in the US. It is the story of the meteoric rise and fall of the BlackBerry. And if you were born in the 21st century, you might be asking, what the hell's a BlackBerry? But this might sound crazy, but once upon a time, prior to the arrival of the iPhone in the summer of '07, there were these devices that were so addictive, everybody called them their crackberries. They had an actual physical keyboard on them, and people loved the way they would click, and they all developed bad posture and carpal tunnel. At any rate, from the late 90s through basically through '07, this is one of the dominant telecommunication devices. And this movie, in very fast-paced and very entertaining fashion, tells you all about these two mad geniuses, one who's an engineer, one who's a businessman, and how for a brief shining moment for a couple of years there, they managed to turn this device into the most popular phone on the planet. And of course, everybody's going to immediately ask, or the first question is going to be, is it as good as The Social Network? And I would argue no, for two reasons. First and foremost, David Fincher is one of the best filmmakers in the world. He shoots everything with this kind of slick, elegant style that's very reminiscent of Alfred Hitchcock, and I think that's probably the best film of his career. But also, the movie came out just a couple of years after, or I guess like maybe 6 years after the launch of Facebook, and Facebook was still growing, was still swelling, and it was still this had all this cultural momentum behind it, and that movie was able to kind of ride that wave. The cultural moment for BlackBerry is very far back in the rearview mirror, and so I feel like this movie, if it had come out in 2011 or 2012, people might have had their minds blown by it. Now it's just one of those really sharp, entertaining movies geared toward adults. The kind of movie that a lot of adults always say, how come we don't get more movies like this in the theater? And then, of course, they stay home and watch shows like Succession, and they wait for a movie like BlackBerry to be available online. And I'm not quite sure that's the wrong approach. I really did enjoy this movie, and it just blasted by. The 2-hour running time felt like 80 minutes. But it's hard to make a case for why you need to rush out and see it this weekend. Like I said, the pivotal cultural moment surrounding the BlackBerry, it's long since passed. And some will make the argument, rightly or wrongly, that if you want to see more movies geared toward an adult sensibility play in the theaters, then you need to support these kinds of movies. But for my money, entertainment should never be supported. If entertainment is excellent and if it's good, well, no one needs to support it. They will feel compelled to go because they will want to go. And I feel like, this is a business of hits. And if you make an outstanding movie, nobody's going to talk about needing to support it. People will voluntarily line up for the privilege of seeing it in the theater. But for my money, I did enjoy it. It has this kind of contagious, aggressive energy and this propulsive momentum. And you will find yourself absolutely getting kind of swept up and going along for the ride. Especially, I shouldn't say if you have any nostalgia for the late 90s, but if you're interested in the technology of the late 90s, I feel like this movie does a great job of kind of showing just how clunky and rugged and how basically how incompatible a lot of the technology was at that time. And in an era where Apple's made so much technology feel kind of slick and has all this really elegant product design, there was a time in the late 90s where technology was just kind of gross and ugly in appearance. But I should mention that this movie is based on the book Losing the Signal, the untold story behind the extraordinary rise and spectacular fall of BlackBerry. And the director, Matt Johnson, played a role in the screenplay adaptation, also stars in the movie as the character Doug. And I have to say, for somebody who's never seen any of his movies, I don't think I've ever even seen him as an actor before, I will be paying attention to his movies moving forward. He shot the movie in this really interesting style that on the surface is going to sound reminiscent of TV shows like The Office or Parks and Recreation, where you're basically seeing the entire drama unfold, almost like you're somebody in the corner just holding up your phone and capturing the action. But I don't want to misrepresent the style either, because even though they sound similar on the surface, this movie is just much more aggressive and much more brutal. And then the way that it's shot, it's almost like you're a lowly assistant kind of hiding and trying to film your boss around the corner, hoping you won't get seen. Because if you do get seen, the character played by Glenn Howerton will probably reach up through your ass and grab your lungs and pull them out your ass. Because in the end, this movie is the Glenn Howerton show. Even though Jay Baruchel does a great job, but what's fun about this flick is this contrast between nerd culture and corporate culture, because you've got all these nerds sitting around in a room playing computer games, having movie night, talking about John Carpenter movies, or talking about the 1984 Dune, or playing with their Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle action figures, or wearing their Army of Darkness t-shirts to business meetings. I mean, these are full-blown late 90s dorks. And in steps this character played by Glenn Howerton, and he's a guy who's never seen Star Wars, and he's a guy who likes watching ice hockey, and he likes sports, and he's very aggressive, and he's corporate, and he wears suits to work, and it's one of those screamers that likes smashing phones down on the receiver and basically breaking everything in his office. And Jay Baruchel's character, Mike Lazaridis, if I'm saying his last name correctly, he makes one of those classic deals with the devil where he gives away a piece of his company because he recognizes they need a shark, they need a killer in the company who can make deals. Like, people that owe them money are always late on their payments, and basically they're a company that's kind of stuck in first gear, and they need somebody who's going to be a really aggressive salesman who will hire a team of aggressive salespeople to go out and get people on board, like AT&T, Verizon, etc., and so forth. And what's fascinating over the course of the movie is watching the subtle transformations in the company's corporate culture, because early on it's all about just a bunch of dorks hanging out and watching Raiders of the Lost Ark. But as time goes by, suddenly you have more people like this character Purdy, played by Michael Ironside, who's one of my all-time favorite actors. I mean, Michael Ironside, he's a Canadian. He was perfect for this movie. But if you've seen Scanners, or if you've seen Starship Troopers, or you've seen Total Recall, like, Michael Ironside is mean as a snake. And so suddenly all these geeks with glasses are confronted by this big, burly, kind of mean guy who's expecting them to meet deadlines and work 80-hour weeks, etc., and so forth. And little by little, as the company enjoys meteoric success, Jay Baruchel's character starts to change. His hair gets a little more slick. He starts wearing suits as well. And the movie does employ a few key time jumps throughout the history of BlackBerry, but probably the most exciting parts are where you get to see, like, the spirit of innovation, where you realize, like, the network that the BlackBerries are using, you could basically have a maximum of 500,000 BlackBerries on that network before they'll just cease to function. And it's incredible to see in this talent raid where they go out and start grabbing the best engineers from the best companies in the world, like Google, and trying to figure out, like, how can we hack into and reprogram all the existing towers in Canada in order to make these BlackBerries function better than ever? So if you enjoy watching advanced, high-level problem solving by really smart people with potentially dire consequences if they fail, those scenes are particularly exhilarating. And I guess another question people are going to ask, which is totally fair, is it better than or worse than Air? And obviously Air just came out a couple weeks ago. It's a big Amazon movie. I think they made that movie for $90 million, then sold it to Amazon for $120. But you got Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, like, all this massive star power. But that's more of like a sports marketing movie, and so you still have that spirit of innovation, but I feel like branding and marketing is different from technological innovation. But also that movie deals with the 80s, whereas this is primarily concerned with the late 90s, early 2000s. I would say I enjoyed BlackBerry a little bit more just because I'm much more interested in technology than I am in sports marketing. But your mileage may vary. If you want movie stars and you want sports, check out Air. But if you want geeks and computer games and people making movie references, then BlackBerry is going to be much more your speed. But I really feel like the best gauge as to whether or not you're going to enjoy this movie is watch the trailer. I saw the trailer a couple weeks ago, thought it looked cool, and it perfectly captures the tone, the style, and the flavor of the movie. If that kind of humor, that kind of dialogue, those kinds of characters are entertaining to you, then hell yeah, BlackBerry will entertain the shit out of you. And I think it's a fantastic example of how to capture 90s era stories without surrendering to loathsome nostalgia. I mean, I feel like we've had so many decades of 80s nostalgia, and I keep asking people, like, where's our 90s nostalgia? Like, I love 90s nostalgia, whether that's, erotic thrillers or whatever the case might be. Like, there was a lot about the 90s that was really fun, really cool. This movie is not nostalgic at all. It's way too hard-hitting to be nostalgic. It's not looking for those kind of sentimental emotions at all. But what's funny about the movie's energy and style is that it's kind of contagious. When I first arrived at the theater, I had the theater all to myself, and at the last minute, a couple people arrived, but it's still just a handful of people. And as the movie started, I kept hearing little, like, beeping noises, and I just assumed they were coming from the movie, given the nature of the film. But about 20 or 30 minutes in, I realized that somebody in the theater had a phone that was beeping constantly, either through texts or emails or alerts or whatever. And then almost like I was copying the character played by Glenn Howerton, I turned around and just started berating and screaming at them. I was like, turn your phone off, blah, blah, blah. And they did it, and it worked. I was like, hey, like, maybe that's why this character, Jim Basili, or Basili, once again, I'm iffy on the pronunciation of his last name, but maybe that's why he was so successful. Sometimes a little screaming and berating does the job. And then in, like, the last 5 minutes of the movie, this person wanders in and is standing right beside me looking at the screen, and then the same tone of voice that I'm using right now looks at me and starts asking me all these questions about what's the name of the movie, what's it about. Is it like, it blew my fucking mind, and I just kept saying, be quiet, it's the end of the movie, and the questions just kept coming and coming. Anyway, it was kind of a ridiculous experience. This is what I get for going to a Regal Cinema instead of my usual Alamo Drafthouse, because at the Alamo Drafthouse, somebody's talking or making noise or using their phone, they get thrown out of the theater with no refund. But that is not the case with the Regal Cinema down on Delancey in the Lower East Side. And as I was watching the movie, I was reminded of this old phrase of the form must follow its function. And I feel like somehow, either through accident or by design, I suspect by design, director Matt Johnson landed on the perfect style and atmosphere and his overall flavor of filmmaking to perfectly reflect the era and the story that he was tackling with this movie. So I was really impressed. And his character, Doug, I feel like is the perfect embodiment of all the geek culture that Jay Baruchel's character slowly but surely drifts away from. And inevitably, you're going to have like a schism between these old friends as one person kind of stays mired in the past, still wants movie nights, still wants to play video games, all that kind of stuff, while Jay Baruchel's character becomes increasingly corporate. But the irony is that the character, Doug, he managed to sell all of his stock when the market was at its peak in 2007. So the real-life character did just fine. Now, I've gotten this deep into the review without offering any criticisms, but honestly, there's not that much to criticize apart from just saying that it's not The Social Network. It's not like, I mean, for a lot of people, The Social Network is the best movie released between like 2010 and 2019. I mean, it's that good. It's not on that level, but the movie's still excellent. It's still very entertaining. It's very fast. It's very aggressive. It's crackling dialogue. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And if there's one key takeaway to be learned from the film, is always to question your own assumptions, because the people at BlackBerry, like when they were going up, and sales just kept climbing, they probably thought they were going to be the dominant player in telecommunications for the next 10, 15 years, and they were completely, totally blindsided by the iPhone. Like everything about the iPhone design and how much data it used and its look and its function, it was the complete and total opposite to the BlackBerry in every single way. The BlackBerry is about being really lean and efficient and practical, whereas the iPhone was about style and image and brand and really slick product design. I mean, Apple's had some of the best product design of any company of the last 50 years. And at that time, when Steve Jobs was still alive, they were releasing products that would be complete and total game changers that made every other product in that category seem irrelevant after the fact. And so maybe this movie is going to be one of those flicks that only appeals to people who are studying business innovation. But I would like to believe that if you like these actors that are involved, or if you are a fan of the director, Matt Johnson, or if you're just interested in sharp entertainment geared toward an adult sensibility, that people will enjoy it. So if it's playing at a theater near you, I definitely recommend that people hunt it down. And if not, definitely hunt it down once it's available online. You will enjoy it. But thank you so much for watching my review. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please consider hitting that notification bell to be notified about future content. You can always leave a comment in the comments below or hunt me down on Twitter at Geekin' Out. But I hope everybody has a great weekend, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.